The crowded boardroom fell silent the moment the woman standing at the back was described as just an administrative assistant. No one knew that she was the one holding the fate of a $2 billion deal in her hands. The top floor meeting room at Northvale Advisory was wrapped in glass, steel, and sharp, calculating gazes. On the large screen, financial figures slid smoothly from one slide to the next, clean, persuasive, and carefully polished. Ethan Rowe stood at the center of the room, posture straight, voice steady, every sentence measured to inspire absolute confidence. Board members, investment funds, legal advisors, all eyes were fixed on him. Near the back wall, almost blending into the dark wood panels, Lena Ward stood still. In her hand was an empty notebook. She did not need to take notes. Every argument Ethan was presenting had been etched into her memory long before this meeting, carved there by sleepless nights and cold mornings when her coffee went untouched as the sun slowly rose. Ethan was speaking about Lorient Global, about overseas subsidiaries, about losses hidden through inventory transfers, about complex legal structures spread across Europe and Asia. His delivery was fluent and confident, as if every discovery were the product of his own sharp intellect and years of experience. Lena felt her heartbeat slow, not from nerves, but from a familiar chill. Every sentence he spoke was one she had written. Every conclusion had come from spreadsheets she rebuilt from the ground up. Those numbers had not been born in this polished boardroom. They were born under a desk lamp, in silence, with nothing but the hum of an aging air conditioner. One investor leaned forward, eyes bright, and said the analysis was remarkably deep. He asked how long Ethan's team had spent on it. Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that made people trust him. About 3 months, he said. He wanted to be certain every risk had been uncovered. Lena lowered her gaze to the blank page. 3 months. She had identified the core issues in a matter of weeks. The rest had been verification, cross-checking, digging deeper. The kind of work no one ever saw. Another voice followed, almost casually, asking how many people had been involved. Ethan glanced toward the back of the room, toward Lena, for just a fraction of a second. Then he answered lightly that there had been administrative support, organizing files, collecting background data, helping with the basic parts. She helped with the basics. Administrative support. The basics. No one reacted. To them, Lena was part of the furniture, like the projector or the long conference table. Useful, but unremarkable. Some faces did not even register her presence. Inside Lena, something shifted. It was not anger, not humiliation. It was a cold, precise clarity. She recognized this moment for what it was. A line being crossed, a before and an after. Ethan continued, confidently describing projected savings of tens of millions of dollars after restructuring, emphasizing how rare this opportunity was, ending with a familiar phrase, one Lena herself had spoken weeks earlier in a private conversation. The truth is hidden inside the numbers no one wants to see. Heads nodded, pens moved. Trust filled the room. Lena scanned the faces around the table. She saw excitement in the investors, quiet satisfaction among the executives, relief on the faces of the legal team who believed they were standing on safe ground. None of them could see what she saw. The unreported obligations, the risks softened by language, the losses buried beneath elegant wording. Ethan concluded his presentation to polite, measured applause. He stepped down, shaking hands, already discussing future deals, larger projects, more money. Lena did not move. Inside her mind, information stacked neatly, clear as a map. She knew exactly where this deal would lead if the truth stayed hidden. She knew who would lose everything. She also knew that speaking up would come at a cost. And yet, in that same moment, she understood something else. The role everyone saw was only the surface. For years, being underestimated had given her what Ethan never had: time to observe, space to learn, and the quiet power of invisibility. The meeting ended. Conversations buzzed with excitement. Ethan was surrounded. Lena walked out last, just as quietly as she had entered. No one knew that a decision had already been made inside the woman they had dismissed as an administrative assistant. And once that decision was carried out, this room would exist only as the memory of a morning before everything collapsed. No one in the company knew that the woman who had just been called administrative support already understood every hidden weakness capable of bringing down an entire empire. and even fewer knew that it had taken her 8 years to become who she was today. Lena Ward was not born into glass-walled boardrooms. She began at a small desk near the entrance, where phones rang without pause and meeting schedules constantly collided. On her first day at Northvale Advisory, she carried a thin folder, an unremarkable degree, and something no one could see, a quiet but razor-sharp ability to observe. In those early months, Lena did exactly what an administrative assistant was expected to do. She organized calendars, recorded minutes, moved documents, and reminded people of meetings. She moved quickly, spoke little, appeared at the right moment, then disappeared just as fast. To most, she was simply a convenient detail that kept the machine running. But while her hands sorted paperwork, her mind never stopped working. Lena read every report she was asked to file. She also read documents no one had assigned to her. Long analyses stretching hundreds of pages, overlooked appendices, small notes buried at the bottom of reports. At first, she read out of habit, then out of necessity. She began to understand that numbers never stand alone. They tell stories, and often they tell stories people do not want to hear. The first person to notice this was not a director or senior partner, but Martin Hale, who at the time led the mergers division. He noticed how Lena asked questions, not many, but always precise. One late evening, when most of the floor had gone dark, Martin looked across at her desk and said that she did not see numbers the way others did. She saw what the numbers were trying to hide. From that moment on, Lena was allowed to remain in meetings where her name was not on the list. She did not speak. She observed. Martin taught her how to read reactions on faces when a valuation was mentioned, how a chief financial officer's hands tightened when debt appeared, how a smile that came too quickly often concealed something wrong. Lena learned fast, but she never showed it. 8 years passed this way. Leaders came and went. She remained. Still Lena, still an administrative assistant, the person who knew every schedule, every relationship, every unspoken tension inside the firm. The one who heard more than anyone else, because no one guarded their words around someone they believed harmless. Then Ethan Rowe arrived. He entered Northvale with a well-told story of success, major deals, impressive returns, a presence that invited trust. From the first day, Ethan noticed Lena, not out of suspicion, but because she was always there, aware of everything, resolving problems before they became visible. At first, his questions were small, opinions on timelines, comments on progress. Lena answered briefly, accurately. Then the questions grew larger, about valuation, timing, how Martin used to handle complex deals. Lena spoke without defensiveness, without pride. She believed she was supporting a teammate, that this was how work functioned, the person in front presenting, the person behind contributing, until ideas she had shared in private began appearing in meetings under Ethan's name. Observations she had voiced carefully became firm conclusions in his presentations. Lena noticed early, but she stayed silent. Silent because silence was what she had practiced for 8 years. Silent because she believed real ability would eventually find its place. Silent because she never imagined someone would go so far as to turn that silence into a weapon against her. When the Lorien Global deal was assigned, Lena understood this was no ordinary project. The workload was massive, the pressure intense, and most importantly, the level of risk far greater than anyone in the boardroom seemed to recognize. She dove into the analysis as she always had, but this time felt different. The numbers were not just complex, they were dangerous. And as the full picture emerged, Lena understood that if the truth remained unspoken, the consequences would reach far beyond a failed deal. Somewhere else in the company, Ethan was building the image of a brilliant leader. And Lena, the underestimated one, was quietly gathering every fragment of truth. Deep inside her, a question began to take shape, clear and unavoidable. If she stayed silent, who would end up paying the price for her silence? Ethan Rowe did not realize that from the very first day he walked into Northvale, the balance of power had already begun to tilt away from him. He believed he was the hunter. In truth, he was stepping into the territory of someone who had been observing from the shadows all along. His arrival carried disruptive energy. The hallways grew louder. Conversations paused when he passed. Firm handshakes, wide smiles, introductions filled with expectation. He was the man brought in to make a difference, to lead, to deliver big numbers for the firm, and Ethan understood that clearly. In his first week, he noticed Lena, not because she stood out, but because she was always present at the most critical moments. She knew who needed to meet whom, where every document was kept, when a meeting was about to slip off course, and she quietly adjusted things before anyone realized. Ethan called this convenience. He began with small questions, carefully disguised in a friendly tone, asking what Lena thought about the leadership schedule, whether a certain timeline was realistic. Lena answered briefly, without emotion, offering observations that were precise, no more and no less. Ethan remembered. Then he asked about valuation, about how Northvale typically approached complex deals, about what Martin Hale used to do differently from other firms. Lena hesitated for a beat, then spoke, not to impress, but because she believed sharing knowledge was part of the job. She believed in teamwork, believed transparency led to better outcomes. Ethan listened closely. He did not interrupt. He did not challenge. He only nodded, only smiled. In his mind, the pieces began to arrange themselves, not to understand the work, but to understand how to take it. In the weeks that followed, Lena sensed something slipping out of rhythm. An observation she had made in a private conversation appeared in a weekly meeting, presented by Ethan as his own conclusion. A warning she had once raised cautiously became a central slide bearing his name. The first time, she told herself it was coincidence. The second time, she assumed this was simply how the system worked. Those behind the scenes contributed. Those in front synthesized. Credit was rarely assigned to individual thoughts. By the third time, Lena knew it was no longer accidental. Still, she stayed silent. In that silence, Ethan rose quickly. He was praised in internal meetings, spoken of as a promising new asset. Partners began seeking him out instead of familiar faces, and he moved through the firm with the posture of someone who knew he was in demand. Lena saw everything from her familiar desk. She also saw what Ethan did not. The questions he never asked deeply enough, the numbers he accepted too easily, the assumptions he trusted because they sounded good. He was skilled at presenting, skilled at connecting, but he lacked patience for complicated truths. When the L'Oreal Global deal surfaced, Ethan seized it immediately. It was the perfect stage, large-scale, wide impact, a victory capable of defining a career. He assigned the background research to Lena, as a habit now formed, telling her to find everything. As detailed as possible, they needed to know where the company was strong and where it was weak. Lena took the materials, and from the first pages, unease set in. The reports were too smooth, the growth curves too perfect. The overseas subsidiaries appeared almost flawless. She dug deeper. She cross-checked, compared, turned over every small appendix, followed inventory trails across borders, connected entities that seemed independent but shared the same risk source. The deeper she went, the darker the picture became. Lena understood this was not merely a difficult deal. It was a bomb wrapped in silk. She compiled her findings carefully, clearly, without emotion, only data, only truth. She handed the analysis to Ethan with a restrained but firm warning. Ethan skimmed it, praised her work, and said he would handle the rest. In that moment, Lena felt a familiar sensation return. Invisibility, but this time it carried a different weight, heavier, more dangerous. Somewhere in the building, Ethan was preparing a presentation that would make the boardroom nod in agreement. And Lena, the underestimated one, was holding the truth powerful enough to alter everyone's fate. She was beginning to understand that silence was no longer the safer choice. The email arrived in Lena's inbox on what seemed like an ordinary morning, and with a single brief line, the air around her quietly shifted. The sender was Samuel Wright, the chief executive officer of L'Oreal Global. Lena read the name again to be sure she was not mistaken. Samuel Wright, the man Ethan praised in meetings as an ideal partner, a decisive leader, someone who fully understood the value of this deal. And now he was reaching out directly to a person the entire firm regarded as nothing more than administrative support. The message was short, polite, emotionally neutral. Samuel wrote that someone had suggested he speak with Lena before making a final decision, just to gain another perspective, unofficially off the record. Lena sat still in front of the screen. In that moment, time seemed to slow. She understood exactly what this meant. This was not a casual conversation. It was a door, and behind that door was the truth she was holding. She also understood the risk. Any response could be seen as overstepping, as breaking protocol, as betraying her superior's trust. Ethan had no idea Samuel had contacted her, and if he found out, he would not stay quiet. Lena typed a few lines, then deleted them, typed again, erased once more. Finally, she replied in the most neutral language possible. She said she supported research and data preparation, that Ethan was responsible for strategic decisions, that she was not in a position to offer judgments. After sending it, Lena leaned back in her chair. She had chosen the safe path, at least for now, but that sense of safety did not last. In the days that followed, as Lena continued digging into Lorien Global's data, her initial unease quickly turned into real concern. What she uncovered was more serious than she had expected. It was not only hidden losses or inventory transfers, it was unrecorded legal obligations, financial commitments pushed into subsidiary entities, risks that could explode with even a minor disruption. She stared at the financial model she had built. The numbers no longer sat quietly. They seemed to be screaming. Lena began to understand why Samuel had reached out to her. Someone in his position would have felt that something was wrong. Reports that looked too perfect, forecasts that flowed too smoothly, a deal so large that perfection itself became suspicious. Meanwhile, Ethan existed in a completely different reality. He moved inside a glow of approval. Meetings multiplied, praise followed him. Trusting looks met his words. He spoke about Lorien Global as if everything were already secured. When Lena sent him the latest update, more detailed, more direct, he skimmed it. He said she was being overly cautious, that in major deals, risk was always present. What mattered, he said, was how the story was told. How the story was told. The phrase sent a chill through Lena. She began to realize that to Ethan, truth was merely raw material. What mattered to him was the version of truth that could be sold, polished enough for the board to approve, smooth enough for partners to sign. Somewhere inside Lorien Global, Samuel was preparing to make a decision that could define his company's future. At Northvale, Ethan was crafting a presentation that would lift him to a new rung of power. And Lena, the most underestimated person in that chain, stood between those two worlds. She could feel the weight of what she held. No one else in the boardroom saw the full picture. No one else had assembled all the fragments of risk. Only her. That night, Lena stayed late at the office. The city outside darkened. Lights on other floors shut off one by one. On the screen in front of her, spreadsheets glowed like warnings that refused to go silent. She thought of Samuel, of Ethan, of the people who would be pulled under if this deal went wrong. She thought of herself, of 8 years of silence, 8 years on the sidelines, 8 years of watching without the right to decide. Lena understood that sooner or later, she would have to choose. Remain the one who supplied data so others could tell their version of the story, or become the one who forced the truth into the open, no matter how high the cost. In the quiet of the night office, one thought became clear, no longer uncertain. This time, if she remained still, the consequences would not belong to her alone. The presentation Ethan prepared did not simply polish the truth, it twisted it. And Lena was the only person in the building who understood exactly how dangerous that was. That morning, the atmosphere at Northvale felt unusually tense. Private meetings were packed tightly onto the schedule. The presentation room was prepared more carefully than usual. Ethan arrived early, adjusted his tie, exchanged quick words with the legal team, his voice calm and confident. In the eyes of many, he was at the peak of his momentum. The Lorien Global deal seemed all but secured. Lena sat at her familiar desk, the original analysis she had written lying open in front of her. The words were familiar, the numbers she had checked again and again. Beside it sat the version Ethan had edited, smoother, easier to digest, and far more dangerous. She saw it immediately as she compared each page. Legal obligations were pushed into footnotes, major risks were renamed as temporary fluctuations. Warning figures were softened by reassuring language. The truth had not been erased, it had been made to look harmless. Lena felt her chest tighten. This was no longer about stolen credit. This was the line between analysis and deception. When Ethan entered the meeting room, carrying his polished slides, many eyes turned toward him with clear expectation. Major investors, legal representatives, senior executives, all waiting for a story convincing enough to approve. Ethan began to speak. His voice was steady and controlled, his pacing precise. He guided them through growth projections, restructuring opportunities, carefully calculated profit scenarios. Each time he mentioned risk, he quickly pivoted to solutions. Everything sounded balanced, reasonable, safe. Lena stood at the edge of the room, silently observing. She saw nodding heads, pens moving, even relief on some faces, people who wanted to believe this was the right decision. But she also noticed what others missed. A legal advisor frowned slightly when a term was reworded. An investor tilted his head, sensing something off, but not yet able to name it. The truth was still there, lurking, not gone. Midway through the presentation, Ethan glanced briefly toward Lena, as if confirming she remained in her usual place, the place of someone without a voice. He continued, more confident than before. In that moment, Lena understood something clearly. Ethan did not just believe he was right, he believed no one could or would challenge the story he was telling. And in that belief, he had misjudged the woman standing at the back of the room. The meeting ended with measured praise, no objections, no direct questions. The machinery of the deal kept moving. As people filed out, Ethan passed by Lena, smiled, and told her she had done very well, that her behind-the-scenes work was truly helpful. His tone was light, almost kind. Lena responded with a small nod. No argument, no reaction. But inside her, a decision was taking shape. She returned to her desk and opened the original analysis again. The numbers had not changed. The truth had not changed. Only the way it was being told. Lena thought of Samuel, of his brief, polite email filled with implication. She thought of the people who would sign this deal without knowing what they were accepting. And she thought of herself, the one who saw the entire picture yet was expected to remain silent. In that moment, Lena realized the real twist did not lie in Ethan's presentation. It lay in her own position. A woman dismissed as administrative support, holding data powerful enough to stop a deal worth $2 billion. She did not act yet, not now, but her silence no longer meant submission. It meant preparation. Because Lena knew that once the truth was placed where it belonged, the beautiful story would collapse quickly. And when it did, no one would be able to say they had not been warned. The call came just as Lena was rising from her desk, and with a single brief greeting, it shattered the silence she had protected for years. Samuel Wright wanted to speak with her directly. His voice was low and unhurried. He did not ask about Ethan. He did not ask about the presentation. He asked how long Lena had been doing this kind of analytical work. The question, simple on the surface, stopped her cold. In that moment, she understood that Samuel was not calling for courtesy. He was searching for the truth. Lena answered carefully. She said she supported research, that her work usually stayed behind the scenes. Samuel paused for a long moment, long enough for the weight of that silence to settle. Then he said that in all his years leading Lorient Global, he had learned one thing. The people who understand risk most clearly are rarely the ones standing behind the microphone. He told her he had reviewed the materials Ethan sent, that they felt too smooth, that the largest risks were wrapped in language so light they almost disappeared. He did not say Ethan was wrong. He only said something did not align, and his instinct told him Lena was the one who could help him understand why Lena felt her heartbeat quicken. This was the moment she had imagined through countless nights. The moment where speaking would change everything, and silence would allow everything to continue, carrying consequences no one was prepared for. In her mind, images overlapped. The original analysis, the softened numbers, Ethan's confident face, the nodding heads in the boardroom, and herself, standing at the back, treated as if she were invisible. Samuel continued, his tone heavier now. He said he was not asking her to accuse anyone. He only wanted the truth before signing a decision that could affect thousands of people. If there was anything he needed to know, he said, this was the time Lena closed her eyes for a single breath. She felt the line she was standing on with absolute clarity. On one side was the familiar safety of silence. On the other was a path with no return. She began to speak. Not quickly, not dramatically, just the truth placed on the table piece by piece. She spoke of unrecorded legal obligations, of risks dispersed through subsidiary entities, of financial models that only held if nothing went wrong, a condition that almost never existed. On the other end of the line, Samuel did not interrupt. He listened closely. Lena could picture his face, focused, tense, the weight of each word carving deeper lines of thought. When she finished, Samuel did not respond immediately. Another silence followed, heavier than the last. Then he said he needed to verify everything. That if what Lena described was accurate, the deal was not merely risky, it was catastrophic. The call ended simply, no promises, no commitments. But Lena knew a door had opened. She set the phone down and looked around the office. Everything appeared unchanged, the desks, the lights, the steady hum of the air system. But she was not. Somewhere else in the building, Ethan was scheduling his next meetings, convinced everything was under control. He did not know that in the span of a few minutes, the story he was telling had begun to fracture. Lena returned to her desk and reopened the datasets. This time, she was no longer working as support. She was working as the one responsible. She understood that from this moment on, the truth had found someone willing to hear it. And once the truth is heard, it does not remain still. For the first time in years, Lena felt something entirely new. Not fear, not anger, but the feeling of standing upright inside her own worth. The email was sent in a silence so complete that Lena could hear her own heartbeat, and in that instant, there was no way back. She sat upright before the screen, hands resting on the keyboard, the office light revealing the fatigue beneath her eyes. Outside, the city lights had come alive. Inside the building, only a few offices remained lit, like eyes refusing to close. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew it would shatter the order she had lived within for years. Samuel Wright had listened, not just heard, but truly listened, and that changed everything. Lena opened the original analysis, not the polished version, not the refined slides, but the raw data, the dense spreadsheets, the notes written through long nights. The truth was not beautiful. It was uneven. It did not please anyone, but it stood firm. She began to write the email, concise, factual, without emotion, without accusation, only data. She laid out the unrecorded legal obligations, the risks shifted into subsidiary entities, the financial models that survived only if the world stood still. She did not call Ethan dishonest. She let the numbers speak for themselves. Her finger paused over the send button. A long moment stretched. Faces surfaced in her mind, Ethan with his confident smile, the investors placing their trust, colleagues passing her desk each day unaware of what she carried, and herself, the woman who had chosen silence for too long. She understood the consequences clearly. A deal worth $2 billion would collapse. Ethan's reputation would be destroyed, and her own position at Northvale might disappear. But she also understood something else. If the deal moved forward on a distorted version of truth, the damage would be far greater. The firm would lose credibility, thousands would be affected, and her silence would become complicity. She pressed send. The email left her outbox quietly, without a sound. But in the invisible space where major decisions are made, it was like a needle piercing the flawless bubble. Ethan had carefully built. Lena closed her laptop, stood, adjusted her chair. She returned to familiar tasks, organizing files, answering routine messages, as if nothing had happened. Inside, everything had changed. 30 minutes passed. Then Ethan's phone began to vibrate. At first, he glanced at it, frowned slightly, and dismissed the call. Just one call. Less than 10 seconds later, it rang again, the same number. This time, Ethan stood and moved toward the glass wall. People nearby began to notice. Lena did not need to hear the conversation. She watched his posture shift from upright to tense to subtly hunched, as if an invisible weight had settled on his shoulders. The call ended. Less than a minute later, the phone rang again. A different number. Ethan answered immediately. His voice dropped, more urgent, short replies, long silences. Somewhere else, Samuel was forwarding Lena's email to legal counsel and independent auditors. No one argued. No one defended the old story. The numbers did the work themselves. In the meeting area, a few people exchanged looks. No one spoke, but everyone sensed something slipping out of control. Lena stood at her desk, her hand resting lightly on the cool wood surface. She felt no relief, no fear, only a strange calm, as if she had finally placed a heavy burden where it belonged. She knew that from this moment on, Ethan was no longer the only one telling the story. And once the truth had stepped out of the shadows, it would not return. 32 minutes after the email was sent, the building began to breathe differently. No orders were given, no announcements made, yet everyone could feel that something inside had cracked. Ethan returned to his desk with an expression no one had seen before. The familiar confidence was gone, replaced by tension. He tried to mask with meaningless, busy movements. He opened his laptop, closed it, stood up, sat down. Every action was faster than necessary, as if speed could push away the growing sense of lost control. Another call came in. This time, Ethan did not stand. He answered at his desk, voice lowered, struggling to remain composed. Short replies, broken phrases, a few hesitations. On the other end of the line, there was no small talk left, only direct, cold questions, drilling straight into the numbers. In a small conference room upstairs, Northvale's legal team began to gather. No one raised their voice. Files were opened, emails forwarded, exchanged glances were enough to understand this was not a routine review. This was damage assessment. Lena's name was called. The administrative manager's voice remained formally polite, but a thin crack ran through its rhythm. They needed all original materials related to Lorient Global, immediately. Lena stood, unhurried. She opened her personal file cabinet, where she had kept everything from the beginning, unedited spreadsheets, handwritten notes, data sources. Ethan had never asked about. She carried them to the meeting room, one stack at a time, placing them on the long, cold wooden table. As the lawyers began turning pages, the air thickened. One stopped at a page. Another leaned closer to read. Lena did not need to explain much. The numbers told their own story. On another floor, Ethan was called into a different meeting. This time, there were no slides, no screens, only questions. Why these obligations were missing from the presentation. Why the financial model only held if nothing changed. Why the most serious risks were given harmless names. Ethan answered, but his voice no longer carried certainty. He spoke of context, of presentation, of making the deal easier to accept. Each sentence sounded like another step backward. At Lorient Global, Samuel Wright sat across from his legal team and independent auditors. On the table lay Lena's analysis, printed and heavily marked. Samuel listened, hands folded, eyes fixed on the lines being traced across the page. With each new finding, his expression grew heavier. Back at Northvale, those who had nodded during the presentation began exchanging looks of doubt. No one spoke it aloud, but everyone understood that if the deal continued, the consequences would no longer be containable. Lena sat at the end of the legal review room, quietly observing. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a cold clarity. Truth, when placed where it belongs, always creates disruption. When the review paused, one of the lawyers turned to Lena and asked how long she had been doing this kind of analytical work. The question was not loud, but the entire room heard it. Lena answered simply that she had been doing this for many years, just without an official title. No one laughed. No one dismissed it. In the hallway outside, Ethan passed with heavy steps. He avoided everyone's eyes, including Lena's. In that brief moment, the old order collapsed without a sound. That evening, when Lena returned to her desk, she looked around the familiar space with a new awareness. She knew that from now on, nothing would be the same. Not because she wanted to change it, but because the truth had forced itself to be seen. And once the truth is seen, it never allows the world to return to what it was. The meeting room door closed behind them, and for the first time since everything began, Ethan had nowhere left to hide. The truth had taken a seat at the table, and it was no longer patient. The room was so quiet that the steady hum of the air system became audible. On the table lay documents that had been opened, marked, cross-checked. There were no polished slides anymore, no reassuring language, only raw data, exposed numbers, and questions that could not be avoided. Ethan sat upright, but his hands were tightly clasped together. His eyes no longer swept the room with familiar confidence. Instead, they darted briefly, urgently, searching for an exit that did not exist. He knew exactly where he was, and this time there was no Lena behind him, quietly correcting the gaps. One of the senior partners spoke first. His voice was not raised, yet every word landed heavily on the table. He asked who had conducted the initial analysis for Lorient Global, not who presented it, but who actually did the work. Ethan replied that it had been a team effort, a familiar answer, safe, practiced. This time, no one nodded. Another voice followed, pointing to a specific spreadsheet, this line, this model, this approach, asking who built it. The question was not aggressive. It simply demanded precision. The tension in the room tightened. Ethan took a deep breath and said that Lena had supported the research, supported. A word that had once protected him. Now it sounded hollow. Eyes around the table slowly turned toward Lena. She sat at the far end, back straight, hands resting lightly on her lap. No defensiveness, no avoidance, just the calm presence of someone long accustomed to standing outside the spotlight. When asked, she answered plainly. She had conducted the full background analysis. She had built the initial financial models. The warnings had been clearly stated in the original version. There was no accusatory tone, no excess emotion, only the truth, spoken at the moment it was required. A silence followed, long enough that even the sound of a chair shifting felt too loud. In that silence, many things rearranged themselves, not only about this deal, but about how power had operated in this room for years. A partner turned to Lena and asked how long she had been doing this kind of work. She replied that she had been analyzing and preparing data for many years, simply without an official title. Her voice was steady. No defense. No complaint. Ethan lowered his head. No one asked him to, but the weight of the truth was enough to pull his shoulders down. He began to speak about pressure, about expectations, about the need to make the deal appear viable. The explanations sounded familiar, but they no longer worked. Another voice cut in, stating that pressure is never a justification for distorting data, that telling a beautiful story is not the same as doing the work correctly. Samuel Wright appeared on the screen at the head of the table as the video connection opened. His face was calm, but his eyes were not. He said the independent audit team had confirmed the findings in Lena's original analysis. He said that if the deal proceeded based on the presented version, the consequences would be destructive. No one objected. In that moment, Lena's true position could no longer be hidden, not because she demanded it, but because the data had done its work. The woman dismissed as administrative support had become the sole anchor of truth in that room. The meeting ended not with applause, but with heavy decisions. The deal was suspended, the process was reset from the beginning, and the old story was officially closed. As people stood, the looks directed at Lena were different now, not curiosity, not pity, but late recognition. She walked out of the room with the same familiar stride. Inside, however, something had changed forever. She was no longer the one standing outside, listening to other people's stories. From this moment on, she was the one through whom the truth had to pass. The decision was made in just a few minutes, yet its aftershock rippled through the company like a silent earthquake. The Lorien Global deal was officially frozen. There was no dramatic announcement, no company-wide email, only sudden meetings, canceled schedules, and faces moving faster than usual through the hallways. Northvale continued to operate, but its familiar rhythm had been broken. Ethan left the final meeting without a word. No one stopped him. No one walked him out. He passed people who once spoke his name with admiration, now avoiding their eyes. Each step felt heavier, not from exhaustion, but from something permanently lost, control of the narrative. For years, Ethan had been the storyteller. Now, he had become a character in someone else's story. Lena was asked to stay. The request came without command, without pressure. Just a simple statement from senior leadership that they needed her, right now. The meeting room was smaller, fewer people inside, yet the air felt heavier. Those seated around the table no longer looked at Lena as background support. They looked at her as the one who had seen what they had missed. One board member said the decision to freeze the deal was not based solely on independent audits, but on the fact that someone inside the firm had the courage to hold on to the truth when it was unwelcome. He did not say Lena's name, but every gaze turned toward her. Lena listened, hands resting calmly on the table. She felt no victory, only a deep stillness. She understood the cost of this moment, and she knew it did not end here. Leadership asked her what she would do differently if given formal responsibility. The question was not a test. It was an invitation. Lena answered slowly. She said the first step was not chasing new deals, but re-examining how the firm assessed risk. That model should be built to withstand disruption, not to look impressive in meeting rooms. That data must be given a voice, even when it makes people uncomfortable. No one interrupted. Another person asked why she had remained silent for so many years. Lena looked down briefly, then up again. She said she once believed her role was to support, not to lead, that she trusted if she did her work well, the truth would eventually find its way. But she also admitted there were moments when silence stopped being neutral and became dangerous. The room stayed quiet, not from discomfort, but from recognition. The next decision came easily, almost without a vote. Lena was entrusted with leading a full review of the firm's unfinished deal portfolio. No grand title, no congratulations, just responsibility. When the meeting ended, Lena stepped into the hallway. Everything felt familiar: the floor, the lights, the echo of footsteps. But the way people looked at her had changed. Not dismissal anymore, but a cautious respect. She returned to her old desk and gathered a few simple things: a notebook, a pen, unfinished data files. She did not move to a new office. Not yet. Sitting down, Lena opened her computer. The question in front of her was no longer whether to stay silent, but something far larger: how to make sure the truth would never depend on a single person again. Outside, Northvale was entering a new chapter, quiet, unadorned, but more real. And at the center of that shift was not the person who spoke the best, but the one who had listened to the numbers the longest. The news was never officially announced, yet it spread faster than any statement ever could. Ethan Rowe left Northvale in silence. There was no farewell, no gathering, no thank you email. One morning, his desk was simply empty, the screen dark, the chair neatly pushed in as if no one had ever sat there. For some, his departure felt sudden. For those who understood, it came too late. Ethan was never labeled a failure. No one used that word. But in this world, silence can be the heaviest verdict of all. Quiet conversations began appearing in corners of the office. Not loud, not public, just lowered voices and knowing looks. People spoke of the L'Oreal Global deal as a lesson, not about ambition, but about the limits of storytelling. Lena walked past those conversations without slowing down. She had no need to explain, no need to assert anything. She understood that her role was not to manage perception, but to guard the truth. The deal review team worked continuously. New evaluation frameworks were built. Old models were dismantled. No one asked anymore whether this would cost opportunities. The only question left was what the cost would be if they did not do it. Lena led the sessions with a calm presence. No force, no display. She asked more questions than she delivered answers. She required teams to prove their assumptions rather than defend them with belief. Gradually, the atmosphere shifted. Less defensiveness, more thinking. One late afternoon, when most people had already left, Lena received a short email from Samuel Wright. He wrote that the decision to stop the deal had spared L'Oreal Global from a chain of severe consequences. He did not call her a hero. He simply said it was rare to see someone choose truth when it offered no immediate reward. Lena read the message twice, then closed it. Not because she did not value it, but because she understood that words like these were not a destination. They were only markers along the way. At Northvale, small changes began to take root, not through policy, but through behavior. Reports were read more carefully. Meetings ran longer because of difficult questions. People who once spoke quickly began to slow down. Someone asked Lena if she regretted it, if staying silent might have preserved a safe position, a quieter life. Lena thought for a long time before answering. She said that safety built on silence is never real safety. It is only the postponement of a greater consequence. That evening, Lena remained alone in the office. She looked out the window at a city still lit, still moving, unaware that inside these quiet rooms, decisions had been made to prevent mistakes before they could happen. She thought of Ethan, not with anger, but with a quiet sadness. He was not a villain. He had simply chosen the easier, faster path and paid for it. Lena returned to her desk and opened a new file. On the first page, there was no deal name, no large number, only a simple note about risk, responsibility, and consequence. She knew that true power does not live in being seen. It lives in deciding what must never be allowed to happen, even when no one knows who stopped it. No one applauded when it was over, and that was exactly what made the moment feel more real than any victory ever celebrated. That morning, Lena arrived at the office as she always had. Not earlier, not later. She crossed the lobby, nodded to the receptionist, stepped into the elevator beside a few coworkers still half awake. No one said much, yet certain looks lingered longer than before. Not curiosity anymore, but quiet recognition. Northvale did not hang banners or announce a new role. But in meetings, when difficult questions surfaced, people instinctively turned toward Lena. Not because of a title, but because they knew the truth would not be softened there. She listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, she offered no ready-made conclusions. She forced everyone to face the data, the worst-case scenarios, the outcomes that followed if they chose the easier path. The air in the room sometimes grew heavy, but no one tried to escape it anymore. One afternoon, a young employee asked Lena how she had endured years of silence. Lena thought for a moment and said that silence itself is not weakness, but remaining silent after seeing the consequences is what becomes dangerous. The answer spread slowly, the way real change always does, not loudly, but steadily. At Lorien Global, the old deal became a case study in internal training sessions. No names were mentioned, only the lesson that the most dangerous decisions are often wrapped in the most beautiful stories. Samuel Wright appeared less in the media, yet in private meetings, he repeated one thought, that he had learned the value of asking the right person rather than trusting the right presentation. Lena did not follow news about Ethan. She did not need to know where he was or what he was doing. Some stories end simply because no one continues telling them. Late one evening, with only a desk lamp illuminating the familiar wooden surface, Lena closed the final file of the day. She sat still for a moment, listening to the quiet of the office after hours. No tension, no urgency, just the steady breathing of a system learning to operate more honestly. She understood that the power she held was not the power to command, but the power to ask questions no one else dared to ask, the power to slow decisions made too quickly, the power to prevent harm before it could happen. Lena turned off the light and stepped outside. The city remained loud. The world stayed full of beautifully told stories. But somewhere, in rooms without spotlights, there were still people quietly making sure the truth was not distorted. And if you have ever believed you were too small to make a difference, remember this. It is not the loudest voice that changes the game, but the one patient enough to listen, brave enough to speak, and responsible enough not to turn back. If this story made you think, leave a comment to share your perspective. If you believe the truth deserves protection, press like to help spread this message. And if you want to continue following stories about quiet power and difficult choices, remember to subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Before you go, take a moment to reflect on what this story is really about. It is not just about corporate power, hidden risks, or a deal that nearly went wrong. It is about the quiet decisions that shape outcomes long before the world notices. It is about the people who choose responsibility over recognition, truth over convenience, and courage over comfort. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of moments when you had to speak up, stay silent, or choose the harder path, share that experience in the comments. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If you believe that real power often operates without applause, press like to help this story reach others who value integrity and accountability. Every interaction helps amplify stories that matter, stories that challenge the idea that only loud voices create change. And if you want to continue exploring narratives about quiet strength, ethical choices, and the unseen forces that shape our world, make sure to subscribe. More stories like this are coming, stories that do not chase attention, but earn it. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of a community that still believes truth is worth protecting.